I'm announcing today, and today we've introduced two ordinances with the goal of just doing the following: effectively banning the possession of handguns for minors, those under 18 years of age. I first want to thank a number of our partners in the law enforcement community, the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, and so many others who are working each day to make sure that our city is safer. We recognize that one step of making our city safer is making sure that young people who have firearms don't have them, and when police encounter young people with firearms, they can not only seize them, but they can make sure that those same young persons don't get to pick up new firearms shortly thereafter. The two ordinances are creative, and they look to the following areas. The first is federal law. Under 18 U.S. Code Section 922, there is a prohibition on the possession of handguns for those 18 and under. Our second of the ordinances that will be on today's docket, and you'll receive a copy of that, looks to do the same through a municipal ordinance violation, effectively banning the possession of a handgun for a minor. This will be the sort of thing that provides a tool to our law enforcement officers who at present often may encounter young people who have firearms, but sometimes, even if they confiscate the firearm, are forced to allow the young people to then just go out, and then they may possess another, and then those are often used at some point later. The other looks to the transfer rules that exist under state law. Missouri law currently bans the opportunity for folks to transfer a firearm to minors. We're making sure that's codified in our city code of ordinances. You may be asking why we're taking these steps today. They should be obvious. First of all, I served on the city council when we banned the sale of tobacco to folks 21 and under. I think at this point we should use every remedy we have to get guns out of the hands of minors. We're stuck with the age of 18 and under, but what we're trying to do is limit minors picking up guns, getting used to them, trying to end a culture of violence, trying to end a culture of gun possession. The other thing that we're trying to do in connection with this is to give police an important tool of enforcement. Right now, the challenge is, even though there is that federal code on the books, the United States Attorney's Office rarely brings a claim against a minor just for a possession type offense. This gives our municipal prosecutors a way to make sure that we're making a difference, and what's more, gives the police an opportunity to make a difference. What we hope to do with these ordinances today is not to arrest more people or to do anything negative to folks, but to instead make two things clear. Right? Minors should not have handguns. The second thing we're making clear is that we are a community that's not going to stand for a perpetuation of gun violence in our city. What we're not going to stand for is folks just walking around with handguns, bringing them to large community events, bringing them to schools, bringing them to other types of areas. It's introduced in today's docket for a very important reason, because it's time for us to act. Too often we say we need to wait for Washington, we need to wait for Jefferson City. I think what you'll see from this mayor and this city council is a goal that we will act to the fullest extent legally possible in every situation that we can. This is but one step of many that I look forward to taking over the weeks and months ahead to make sure that we see less gun violence in our community. We understand that young people sometimes don't know what they're doing when they first pick up a gun, and unfortunately make a number of detrimental choices for themselves and for others in our community. I think the actions that we will take with this ordinance, and I look forward to passage at committee, the action that we'll take will save lives, it will make people safer, it will let young people know that they don't need a gun to actually be safe in their community, and frankly what it's going to do is, I think, change a narrative and hopefully change choices. So that 14-year-old, that 15-year-old, that 16-year-old is seeing something different when they're thinking about picking up that first handgun. That's what I have to say for you now. This is consistent with my goal to get us off of the top 10 list of most dangerous cities, and I stay resolved that we're going to do that. We'll see a reduction in homicides. It's going to take all of us working together. You've heard me talk about gun buybacks, which is an idea that I continue to stay interested in. These are more ideas that are consistent with that, and we'll keep working until our citizens can feel saper. I'll take any questions.
Folks that say this is redundant, that there is some provisions in the Missouri law, and there's certainly the cite in the federal code that you did, that this is already on the books in some fashion, and what you're proposing here is redundant.
So yeah, I mean, we have to be creative with state law. What we're changing today, or what we're adding, really relates to, I think, how clear we can be. And in the second of the ordinances introduced today, you'll see a sentence that will say that a minor in possession of a handgun, right, is in violation of a certain provision of state statute. What we're doing right now is actually making a link that hasn't often been made. And so that is, in essence, a case that's hard to prove for prosecutors. What we're trying to do with this ordinance is actually allow them to have a tool that would create a municipal municipal ordinance violation, i.e. giving you an opportunity to arrest, to seize the firearm, and to have some standing to do it in a way that's not being enforced presently with the way that state law is being read, and certainly not being enforced because the federal charges often are not being brought. So what I think, and we can go through the law at length because I'm always happy to, but what we're really doing today is effectively banning the possession of a handgun for minors, and that's what we're doing through the codification of these, relying on both federal law and state law. The reason for that is very clear, and Mike, you know this. State law attempts and endeavors to set up a number of preemptions on a local government's ability to act. We think we've come up with a manner in which we can ban the possession of handguns using state law relating, in essence, to the transfer of certain weapons and saying that possession of it is evidence of said transfer, and relying on the federal law that actually just bans the possession of a handgun, linking those together to create, I think, this municipal ordinance violation that suggests for us that minors may not possess the handguns at issue.
The violation will be at what level in the municipal code? I don't think you have.
No, we don't have levels, so it would be subject.
You can't declare it a felony.
Right, it would be subject and consistent with municipal ordinance violations, but I'll make this comparison for someone who's either concerned or confused. Drinking laws, right? You may understand that a minor in possession of alcohol, right, currently can go through a number of different, so first, can be stopped and charged for such a thing. Usually there is diversion that will come thereafter, and what we're trying to do in connection with this is, frankly, the same things that we have in connection with possession of alcohol, the same thing that we may have in connection with sales of tobacco to minors, we're trying to suggest can be the same thing we're seeing with firearms in this issue, particularly with handguns. We're limited to handguns. That is something we're limited to from both the federal law and state statute provisions. I'd love to make it broader. But I think this is a way that we can legally ban the possession of handguns for minors and do it in a way that does not run afoul of state law or run afoul of a state preemption.
Mayor, can you say why, if there is a federal statute that prohibits this and state law that speaks to this, why would a 14-year-old be afraid of a municipal violation? And they're already subject to prosecution by the U.S. attorney and or the local prosecutor.
Right.
A ticket seems like something that's not going to be much of a deterrent.
Right. A few things. I mean, I think the first step is how we are enforcing the federal law. I think there is some lack of clarity for officers. The first step will be you don't typically, as I've heard, like to make lots of arrests for which there will never be any charges. And so the idea that you will actually be able to work with a municipal prosecutor in certain situations to actually bring charges, I think gives a better enforcement tool, one that's clearer for our officers to enforce. In terms of the deterrent aspect that you're discussing, frankly, the first answer relates to that. If the officers know that they can make an arrest or enforce in connection with it, then I do think no one walking down the street, or none of us, actually are looking forward to either being arrested or actually being stopped for some level of offense. I'm not saying this will necessarily change everything about a 15-year-old's mind, but what it allows an officer to do now, instead of having to go through a list of questions relating back to a federal law that really isn't enforced. Instead, they actually say, well, we have the authority to arrest. We can confiscate the firearm and seize it without fear of actually what happens to the firearm thereafter. And what we're really doing, and trust me, because I've been knocked for gun buybacks this week, there will be critiques of this, right? These are all steps, right? We are working as much as we can to build up as many steps as possible to make sure that, one, there aren't guns available as a supply issue, two, that certain classes of persons will not have firearms. And I think the class of person that state law gives us the opportunity to limit possession to is minor people. And so I think this is actually an important step for us in a way that we have not been able to use before. And importantly, I think the minor in possession of alcohol analogy is an apt one here, because if you think about how those cases are often disposed, it's through diversion, right? There's not jail time for your typical 18-year-old who's walking around with a can of beer. What there is instead is some diversionary idea. What we can do through these diversion approaches, and we have many in municipal court, and rarely actually are we looking to incarcerate folks through the municipal justice system, is to say, requiring conflict resolution, teaching folks about the negatives of firearms, and having some compulsory opportunity to do so in connection with these. This is what we're trying to do. I understand that this is not will create a panacea of every 15-year-old stops trying to acquire a gun, but what it sure as heck allows us to do is for officers to see that 15-year-old, that 16-year-old with a firearm, to be able to stop them, to be able to seize the firearm, and to be able to take the steps necessary to ensure they're not just picking up another one 2 hours later.
Because right now, if you're 15 years old.
What's that?
Is it just handguns?
It's just handguns, and
Kids going out to hunt with dad, they can still have long.
I'd like to change that too, and you know, I won't say that we won't. What I'll say is we haven't figured out the way yet, but we have a lot of creative lawyers in the building who are going to help us do it. Yes, ma'am.
So you're 15 years old, you're 12 years old, you have a gun. A police officer at the moment has to give it back?
Typically, I think what we've seen are seizures of that firearm. Now, there is some question as to on what basis are you seizing the firearm, particularly if charges aren't subsequently filed. So the concern would be to your thesis or to the hypothetical, yeah, if you pick up a 12-year-old's gun today and there are no charges forthcoming with a 12-year-old's gun, then we would be required, theoretically, to give the 12-year-old's gun back. And so I think it would be much better, and this is what we're doing today, to actually come up with an ordinance violation that suggests that there was a crime committed so that the firearm could not be retained by the minor of any sort. Let me make sure I talk about limits in connection with this. There will still be the parental consent exception. And so with the ordinance, and there will be more work on the ordinance in connection with it, and we'll talk to more lawyers and more folks along the way, I would like to, and I think the way we've written it now, we're requiring an express consent of the parent for the minor to have the firearm. What that would mean is in advance you need express consent of the firearm, of the parent to have the firearm. The distinction I'm making here is this, that today, right, you can be picked up as a minor with a firearm. Sometimes there's a conversation if the minor says, yeah, my mom lets me have it. Right? What I'd like to see us create is a situation where, no, you can't just say that, right? We actually need some written document, some other documentary proof that suggests that the firearm actually can be in possession of the minor in advance. Other exceptions, of course, will relate to service in the armed forces, as some minors do. I believe the federal statute also has a hunting exception, and we understand that we have limits, that we work in a country and in a state. We're trying to use to the fullest extent possible our ability to make sure that these are limited. And frankly, this is another step. And if it's not clear of what we're doing, we're trying to always, right, take more guns off the streets that might get into the hands of minors, none of whom know how to use them.
You mentioned diversion. What are the penalty options for a local prosecutor if they pursue?
And this is where you're testing my municipal court knowledge. The largest penalty available in municipal court is a fine. And it's in the low thousands of dollars, and I believe might now be up to 3, but I'd have to check that. And we did not write it in the ordinance. I think we're just making them coextensive with municipal court violations. And then the maximum fine that you could receive for a misdemeanor, which would be, I believe, 1 year of incarceration as your max. And of course, I would note that rarely is that imposed, and we would not look for that to be imposed in these situations. Our goal here is not to throw teenagers in prison, but our goal is to not only get guns out of the hands of teenagers, but also to make sure that those teenagers know not to possess and know not to pick up new guns again. I mean, we've heard examples of a minor being stopped with a gun, the police seize it, which already is actually a legally questionable step, and then the minor gets another firearm, the police run into same minor again, right? They seize it again, and we're not actually having the opportunity to have the long-term impact that we would like. I think this is an important step suggesting that we can. Yes, ma'am.
You had mentioned,
What's that?
you had mentioned, I think it was over the weekend or sometime at the beginning of the week, that this used to be the law that they used to be able to take the guns away from minors. Was that just a couple years
Here's the thing. To Mr. Brother Helling's point, right? There is a federal law that says a minor cannot have a handgun. The problem we have right now is, and it's through no fault of anyone really, right, of an enforcement priority of the federal government and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and frankly I think it's merited, is that they're usually handling much more serious offenses than minor in possession. You don't hear a lot about federal misdemeanors for a reason, because they have a petty docket in federal district court, but one that actually isn't full of lots of teenagers and that sort of thing. What I'm saying right now is that we at the local level do have courts that have familiarity with dealing with minors. We do work work very closely, as does federal government, but we work very closely with our Kansas City, Missouri Police Department to make sure that we're giving them a tool, and we have the opportunity to enforce said tool through the municipal justice system that will allow us to actually make sure that when we say we're banning the possession of handguns, we're really doing it.
So you don't believe you were preempted by state law?
I do not believe we're preempted by state law. When you read the ordinance, you'll see that there's all types of vexing language. Part of the reason for that is because we worked very hard to avoid preemption. The ordinance, I'll be honest with you, as a lawyer that I wanted to write would be Section 1, minors may not possess handguns, C, 18 U.S. Code Section 922. But I understand that we want to make sure that we are not preempted by federal law. I think we've written it in a way that does that while still effectively accomplishing the same goal. It's just with a lot more words. I'll take two quick questions.
I have one. So you mentioned the large crowds, the large events, where everybody's thinking Crossroads probably.
Yes, ma'am.
That person was 18 years old.
Yes, ma'am.
So what do you want to say to people who are going to maybe criticize that and say, what good will these ordinances do if that person was 18?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a start. Right? I mean, we have to keep working, I think, to save lives. Tragically in this city, and I have numbers relating to it, and I know we've all seen it, but tragically in this city, we have people under the age of 18 who commit crimes too. We have people under the age of 18 who have killed people, who have killed themselves, who have engaged in dangerous gunplay. This is a step to try to cure that. We have many more steps that we'll try to take to make sure we're addressing those who are 18 or over. But I think this is a way that we can handle this within state law that allows us to say, right, we're taking the hands out of folks who really should not, taking the guns out of the hands of folks who should not have them. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any safeguards built into the ordinance that could prevent something like stop and frisk from happening to young people?
At this point, there are not. And so I would imagine to the extent that there are self-defense arguments raised or anything of that sort, you're still entitled to certain self-defense standards under state law. And so we could entertain a broad array of possibilities, but I would imagine if you are using a firearm in some level of self-defense, then you would be able to raise that as an affirmative defense, much like you could in any other type of proceeding. All right? Thank you so much.
Crossroads shooting involved a minor? Did the suspect have the gun before he turned 18? Do you know that?
Could you say that again? I'm sorry?
Do you know if the suspect in the Crossroads shooting had that gun before he turned 18?
Oh, I do not know, but that presents one point of mine. I suspect, and this is me not using enough data right now, but I would suspect a lot of people who are 18 years old didn't pick up their first gun at the age of 18. And I would think that what we're stopping now is when someone is being indoctrinated sometimes into a life that they think they need to possess a firearm. I'm hoping that this is a break in it. The same logic we used on our Tobacco 21 campaign, the same logic we use with alcohol laws is the logic we're using here, which is the view that if we can stop someone from a young age in engaging in an antisocial behavior, then they are less likely to do so at a later age. And I think right now what we're saying is if we can stop you at 15, at 16, at 17 from having a gun, then it's less likely that at 18 or 19 you're picking it up. All right? Thank you.